Hello, everybody. Welcome to MEERTALK. My name is Kaisa Fern, and I'm the Director of Communications at MEER. We are so glad to be getting together again for a MEERTALK. Today, we will be hearing from John Vaillant. Then we'll take questions from people in the MEER community. And after that, we'll open it up for some questions from our live audience. MEER recently celebrated 3 years of operating as a nonprofit under social and environmental entrepreneurs. And we certainly couldn't have done that without your ongoing support. If you don't already donate and you would like to contribute toward our efforts to cool the planet, we really appreciate your donations. You can go to meer.org/donate. And thank you very much for contributing. You could also write to info@meer.org if you'd like to be in touch. So I will tell you about our guest speaker. John Vaillant is an author and freelance writer whose work has appeared in magazines such as The New Yorker, The Atlantic, National Geographic, and The Guardian, among others. His first book, The Golden Spruce, as well as his second book, The Tiger, were both bestsellers. His latest book, Firefighter, is an international and national bestseller. It was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and has been named one of the 10 best books of 2023 by the New York Times, among many other prominent publications. If anybody has questions that come up while John's presenting, you can send them to co-host Barbara in the chat. Well, John, we're so glad you could be with us today, and we're really excited to hear what all you have to say.
Well,
welcome.
thanks. Thank you, Kaisa. Really glad to be with you all, wherever you are. It looks like it's a fairly intimate group we've got here, so I'm going to go fairly quickly and try to move into a more kind of Q&A conversational mode as quickly as possible. But, I really just want to acknowledge MEER's efforts on behalf of the planet. And I think decarbonizing is the number one task, but mitigating the impacts of the heat we already have and are going to be seeing more of is equally important, and low-tech, portable, versatile solutions to that are really key. And MEERS is a champion of that. And so I'm proud to be associated, and I hope I can be helpful. So I'm going to be basically speaking to these slides, motoring through pretty quickly. I think most of you know a lot about heat already. So I'm going to be getting into a couple of other ideas as we move along. But this line from For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, a book that was popular about a century ago. He published it about a century ago. And the one character in the book is saying, so how did you go bankrupt? And the other fellow says, well, 2 ways: gradually and then suddenly. And those lines really ring true for me in terms of where we're at now with climate change and with our understanding of it and with our response to it. And we have been being warned for 2 generations, effectively, really since the 1950s, in the mainstream press. Authoritative voices have been warning us. And now we're in this period, that was the gradual period, and we didn't have a lot of data about the actual warming, but now it's in abundance, and it shows up now with every headline. And so we're in this period of acceleration. And what is extraordinary about that, and I think brand new, not just for our species, but for our planet, is never before has human history, climate history, and technology all been moving so fast simultaneously. And what's amazing now is, I think we often thought and have operated under the assumption that we are these kind of human beings and we are performing civilization on the stage of planet Earth. And the stage is supposed to stay relatively stable so we can do our thing and perform our magnificent feats of invention and creativity and culture. and expansion. And now the Earth is changing too. And it's not just changing in an epochal way, it's changing in an immediate, sudden way. And so we're not ready for that. Our civilization's not ready for that. Our infrastructure is not ready for that. I think even more important, our psyche is not ready for that. You know, it's like mom suddenly becoming schizophrenic when she's been a very stable, dependable entity. And that is literally changing in real time, you know, practically from day to day. And people talk about this idea of the new normal, which, you know, I find really annoying. And it's appealing to media people, I think, because it's alliterative and we like the sound of the ends going together. But where we're really at is a slightly more cumbersome term, which I would call clima incognita, the unknown climate. And so this is a period of continual change and whipsawing extremes. And that will be the rest of our lives. So we have to wrap our heads around that. And that's where I feel like MEERS is facing that really difficult fact in some very low-tech practical ways that will really make a difference. Because as we are seeing, individual degrees of increase make a difference. They make a difference in fire behavior, absolutely, and they make a difference in whether we live or die. And I really think an apt analogy here is fever. And we were talking about that before with Will, a firefighter who's with us today. The Earth has one. And a fever is a really good, simple indicator of basic health. And we can handle a degree or two. But when you get up, you know, our normal, I think it's 37 Celsius. I came from a Fahrenheit background, but so 98.6 Fahrenheit, 37 Celsius, that's our normal generally, that's our baseline. Well, when you start cracking 100, when you start cracking 40 Celsius in your body, you know, you're going to the hospital. And if you go much further past that, you're going to die. And there's really no two ways about that. And what we're pushing the Earth now into a fevered state, and things are starting to die, and humans among them. A whole bunch of firefighters have just been hospitalized, I believe, or taken off the job in Northern California because it is simply too hot to fight the fires. And that's a real problem when the people who are sent to save you can't save you because it's too hot. We've probably, a lot of us have seen these charts. This is Antarctic sea ice over the past 40 years or so. And 2023 obviously was this really anomalous year, but it wasn't so much an anomaly as a glimpse of the next phase that we're going into. It was not, we're not going back, that's for darn sure. We are going forward into a hotter place that has a lot less ice in it. These are North Atlantic sea surface temperatures. We see that kind of jumble of colored spaghetti, and then we see this one red line off by itself. That's how out of the norm the North Atlantic was in terms of heat last year. And now we see on the lower left 2024 creeping in, and you know, you can feel it. The water feels different, and obviously that's going to influence the air above it and the amount of water it can hold. So you're going to have more flooding and warmer temperatures in general. These are global surface air temperatures. Again, we're going back since 1940. Those are the blue temperatures that are nice and cool looking, and then they get redder and redder and redder. And then you have 2023. And so there's just that we crossed over some threshold, and we're because we're in clima incognita, these are places we have never been before. We are seeing a new world that we're making. Alex Steffen, a wonderful futurist out of Berkeley, California, coined this term. Pretty sure he coined it, discontinuity. It's a word we all really need to know. It's a word for the 21st century. An event or situation wherein past experience ceases to be a useful guide to future problem solving. And we really saw that. I wrote this book, Fire Weather, and we really saw that in the response to that terrible fire that swept through the petroleum capital of Canada, Fort McMurray, Alberta. and evacuated, forced that place to evacuate in what became the largest, most rapid evacuation due to fire in modern times. And they had great data, and Will can speak to this. We have really good predictive data about climate, about fire behavior, about relative humidity and temperature, wind direction. We've got all that really dialed. And they had that information, and they still called the evacuation late and totally underestimated the amount, the overwhelming power that fire generated, which I'll be talking about more in a little bit. This is fire radiative power, FRP, something I didn't know about till last year. And it's the raw energy generated off the leading edge of a wildfire. Neil LaRoe, an atmospheric scientist out of the University of Nevada in Reno, using satellite data, basically just ran satellites over the top of the nation of Canada, the second largest nation in the world after Russia, tracking its fire behavior, which was completely, as you can see off the charts, that crazy magenta line, that's 2023 compared to other fire seasons in the lower right. So it looks like in 2023, someone just attached a balloon to the graph and let it go. And how you measure fire radiative power coming off a wildfire is typically in megawatts. A megawatt is 1,000,000 watts. In the case of Canada, they had to resort to terawatts. That's 1,000,000,000,000 watts. The wildfires during the Canadian fire season, the Black Summer of 2023, generated about 42 terawatts of raw energy. And that is, besides being off the charts, it's the kind of energy that, if harnessed, could run megalopolises like Tokyo or Beijing for many, many months. It's an extraordinary amount of energy. And it's just one way of trying to understand what happened last summer and what is happening now in Russia. Russia is having Siberia in particular is having a hellacious fire season. Again, this is 2023, Canada wildfires worse than in recent years. Again, we see in the lower right-hand side, the hectares burned in past seasons, starting in 2016, but then 2023, the actual number is closer to 18 million hectares. That's equivalent to the area of Oklahoma or Hungary or Uruguay, like a whole country burned over. These are greenhouse gas emissions for Canada. What's interesting here is, so the gray this is going back to 2003, the gray, fairly constant, that's industrial emissions. And Canada's a G7 country, signed on to Paris and Kyoto. And one thing it has not done a very good job of is reducing its emissions, which other G7 countries have managed to do. The orange line, on the other hand, are emissions due to wildfires. And that goes up and down as one would expect. And then over on the right-hand side, here is this line that looks totally unrelated to the rest. Those are the cumulative CO2 emissions from the wildfires of 2023. And, basically, I think it was, equivalent to the carbon output of India or Germany. I can't remember which, but it's major countries worth of emissions came simply from the wildfires. Another thing that's happening, and this is happening all over the place, some of you may live in fairly precarious countries, and others may think of yourselves living in very safe and stable places. I live in Canada, which thinks of itself as a very safe and stable place, until I spoke to Conrad Sauvé, who runs Red Cross Canada. And he told me that when he's the CEO, and when he started working for Red Cross Canada about 20 years ago, 80% of the work that Red Cross Canada did was outside the country. And that's kind of what you would expect. We would go to other more vulnerable, injured countries and try to help out. Well, now 80% of Red Cross Canada's work is inside Canada. Not only does that deprive the rest of the world of Canadian expertise and resources, it indicates that Canada is no longer the safe and stable place that it thought it was. Down here, we had 250,000 evacuees due to fire in the summer of 2023 in Canada alone. That's 250,000 people on the road, not certain where they're going, when they can come back, or how they're even going to travel. Some of these evacuations were from communities to which it is 1,500 kilometers before you find another place with um, urban services like a good airport and a good hospital. Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories was evacuated, and they're really far from anywhere else. So in fact, the evacuation itself becomes its own emergency. Fires aside, getting burned over aside, losing your home aside, simply being on the road for 1,500 kilometers through wilderness with elders, with people with health issues, with people who may not have enough gas, it creates a whole new kind of precarity. And this is something that I think I sort of fall back on this. It's very easy to get tangled up in the politics and the morality, which are real and need to be addressed. But in this guy, Robert Ingersoll, he was a lawyer and a bunch of other things in the United States in the mid-19th century, said in nature, there are neither rewards nor punishments. There are only consequences. And that is where wildfire, and again, Will can speak more to this, the weather reports that fire services are now having to deal with and act within are really harsh. These are not punishments for previous behaviors or transgressions. These are the consequences of choices we've made and the energy we've allied ourselves to. This is a term that Will certainly knows, and all of us need to know, no matter where we live in the world, and that is wildland-urban interface, also known as the WUI. This again assumes, English language and probably a pretty North American way of understanding wildfire, but that's probably a pretty good way because we've got a lot of experience now, along with Australia. And the wildland-urban interface is where the wildland, forest, grassland, meets the built environment. It could be a small town, it could be a village, it could be a city. But the WUI is sort of where the action is. And that boundary, which was sort of somewhat sacred and inviolable in a lot of our minds, is getting crossed more and more often. And part of that is because we are building deeper and deeper in North America into the forest, but it's also because the fires are more intense, the embers are flying further, the temperatures are higher, humidity is lower, and so those embers can travel further and do more damage when they land. And this is, again, this is really a North American issue, principally, maybe Australian too, moving out into the country, into this paradise. For so many of us in the Northern Hemisphere, and I think really all over the world, the forest is a sanctuary. The jungle is a sanctuary. It's a place of nurture and nature. The food comes from there. A sense of identity comes from there. But fire also comes from there. And so we're in this terrible gear grind between these places that once were not only carbon sinks and now becoming net carbon emitters, but also places of sanctuary and employment and great pleasure and joy, are becoming places of enormous danger and hazard. And so again, this is part of this psychic and intellectual shift that we're being forced into, and that a lot of us are fighting against because we want our old world, when we want our old world back. So this is an interesting and informative picture. If you see this on your near horizon, wherever you live, you really want to pay attention. This is the Fort McMurray fire a day before it entered the city. So you see it out there in the forest. This is May 2nd, 2016. We're in Alberta, outside the city of Fort McMurray, about 1,000 kilometers north of the US border, deep in the boreal forest. This is a shot from Fire Hall 5, which is a few kilometers south of town. And so what you see there is a wildfire, which is no biggie in Alberta. Alberta is largely boreal forest. It burns every summer. Boreal forests are historically and naturally huge fires. You can burn 1,000 square miles and newspaper won't even cover it. There's a lot of uninhabited territory up there, and the areas that are inhabited are often inhabited by indigenous communities who are generally underreported on. So here, this is outside of Fort McMurray, a city of close to 100,000 people and the petroleum hub of the entire country of Canada. It's the largest source of foreign imports into the United States, and it's about to be evacuated. So at this time, though, there was no talk of evacuation whatsoever. But what you can see is in these black coilings of fire of great intensity. And this is a scene from the next day. And this is a scene from the only exit road out of one of many neighborhoods that were completely overrun by fire in a matter of hours, in some cases minutes. The guy who took this photo, Paul Ayerst, is shooting over the dashboard of his pickup truck. You can see the fire reflected in his hood at the bottom there. These crazy fire entities are called dragons by wildfire fighters. They're exploding gas. And something we need to understand about how fire works is it's not burning the object. It's heating the object up until it starts to off-gas hydrocarbons. And that could be a car tire, it could be a nylon curtain, it could be prairie grass, it could be a black spruce tree, it could be your running shoe. But your running shoe won't burn by itself. It has to be heated up enough until it starts to off gas. And that's what the flame engages with. Flame likes to engage. It's a chemical reaction that engages with gas. So that's what you're seeing there is exploding gas. And what Paul Ayerst is seeing in the left-hand side of the screen is his wife and his daughter in separate cars with balls of fire rolling over them. And I asked him, Paul, did you happen to have the presence of mind to look at your dashboard thermometer? And he said, I did. And I said, well, what did it say? And he said, it said 66 Celsius. So outside, the heat coming off that fire was 500 Celsius. That's hotter than Venus. And so firefighters I spoke to in Fort McMurray were describing houses burning to the ground, burning to the basement in 5 minutes. And I didn't think that was possible. So I talked to a physicist who specializes in burning structures. And he said, well, you should probably look at the Hamburg firestorm, that Allied bombing of the German city of Hamburg in 1943. So basically, you can achieve those temperatures. And once you do, you've got a firestorm going. And no one's putting that out. All you can do is run away. Water has no effect on it because when you're pumping 500 Celsius heat coming out of the fire, I just blocked on the term for it. Will could probably help me out here. But in any case, radiant heat is what comes out of the fire. It's what tells you not to touch the candle. It moves at the speed of light. And when it's 500 Celsius, you put a fire hose in there, that fire hose is going to evaporate 100 meters before it ever touches a flame. And that's what happened in Fort McMurray, and this gigantic pyrocumulonimbus firestorm system started over the entire city, rose 45,000 feet. That's like maybe 17 kilometers into the sky, punctured the stratosphere, and became its own storm system, generating lightning that started more fires 40 kilometers away from the center, and also brought all the fire hose water and the burning houses and trees back to earth in the form of black hail. And you can read Exodus in the Old Testament and see a similar scene. This isn't what I would call an end times class fire. So this is an interesting thing. By now the fire has been burning in the city for 3 days. City's been evacuated since the first afternoon. Firefighters are there. One thing that happens to firefighters in fires like this is they don't get any rest. I coined a term which is 21st century fire. It has certain characteristics that are different from the fires of the past. And one of them is they expand aggressively during the night. Historically, wildfires in particular would calm down at night. The temperatures would drop, the dew would fall, the fire wouldn't go out, but it wouldn't grow aggressively. And because the firefighters knew where the fire was, they could take a break, get 4 hours of sleep, and then go back and hit it in the morning. Now they're working 24 hours straight, 48 hours straight, pushing into 72 hours. They are working until they are hallucinating and collapsing because the fire doesn't stop. And that is obviously really dangerous for human health, for firefighter health, and it's a qualitative change in fire behavior. And so what you see happening here, only a firefighter could have taken this. This is a fire hose, not being, this is a neighborhood in Fort McMurray that is in the process of being completely leveled by this wildfire. And so they're trying to hose down the outer ring of houses, behind the fire, trying to stop it. But what's happening here is you see the fire hose going up, and then where it turns kind of dark gray in the middle of the flame, you see it actually bending. And what's happening there, that's the energy of the fire, the heat energy spiraling up into a 15-kilometer tall fire chimney, vaporizing the water and sucking it up into the column before it has any firefighting capability at all. So this is what our tools can do against a fire like this, which is effectively nothing. So they had to resort to really extreme measures in this neighborhood, which was tearing down standing houses with bulldozers and backhoes to try to build a fire break through the community. And they did, $30, $50, $100 million worth of damage that night, destroying brand new homes built by this superheated petroleum economy that makes Fort McMurray, at least in 2016, one of the wealthiest municipalities in all of North America. These brand new homes, $500,000, $750,000 a pop, being torn to the ground, with everybody's stuff still inside them. And I interviewed the bulldozer operators and backhoe operators in fire weather, and it's intense what they saw. This is what Fort McMurray looked like at about 3 a.m. from about 30 or 40 kilometers away. And people evacuating, in this case to the north, looked back and said it looked like Fort McMurray had been hit by a nuke. So we're jumping here. We need to understand now what fire can do, and it can do things it didn't used to be able to do. This again is 21st century fire. This is Redding, California in August of 2018. This is after a fire tornado tore through a part of Redding. It killed 5 people. It picked trucks like this up in the air, threw them around, and destroyed them. And it was the first one ever in the Northern Hemisphere. Australia had one in 2003, but that was, I think, technically a tornado that merged with a fire. This was an EF3 tornado, 165 mile an hour horizontal winds and metal melting temperatures. So this is Armageddon, without exaggeration. It's a real end of the world type scenario that was imposed on these folks. This is what happened. This truck here was rolled numerous times. Behind it there is a 100-foot tall, 30-meter tall, high-tension transmission line. There were 2 of those. They're made of solid steel. They have many tons of heavy cable draped across them. You can see it in the foreground there. The tornado ripped those out of the ground and threw them into the forest. This is a steel tractor seat. This is a cast iron frying pan. And this is, what Fort McMurray looked like. This is what a lot of communities are looking like now. This is what Valparaiso looks like right now after its terrible fires of 6 weeks ago. This was an anomalous site back in 2016 when this picture was taken of Fort McMurray. And now we're seeing them all over the world. These not just fires, but total destruction. And these are the tar sands, also known as the oil sands, the bitumen mines of northern Alberta, which are expanding right now to supply more what's called synthetic crude oil to the United States. They just completed a pipeline to the Pacific coast that increases their delivery capacity. And you have, again, Canada, it's a progressive, supposedly, G7 country that signed on to all these protocols, that is expanding its petroleum industry aggressively. And what I came to understand, gives you a sense of where we're at. These are G7 countries since 1990. You can see the flags, and then you can see Canada. Canada is the outlier, almost like that 2023 FRP, fire radiative power chart. They're going a different direction than the rest of us. This is very famous, the Keeling curve. We all know this chart, I suspect. But back in 1959, at the lower left, Edward Teller talk at Columbia University. Edward Teller, one of the greatest physicists of his day, father of the hydrogen bomb, kind of a crazy guy, but a very, very smart one. He warned at this conference called Energy and Man at Columbia University in 1959. He explained how CO2 works to a bunch of petroleum executives, bankers, journalists, and scholars. And he told them what would happen if we continued expanding fossil fuels at the rate that we have been doing. And he described the melting scenario, the loss of the ice caps. And he just said this in 1959 to some of the smartest, most powerful people in North America. And here we are. This is, we've all seen this too, I suspect. And I'm not sure how much we want to get into this, but this is an internal memo from Exxon. This basically indicates that they fully understood what would happen if we continued expanding the development of fossil fuels at the rate that they were expanding in the late 1970s. And they basically, I'm not going to go through every figure on this chart, but they basically predicted accurately the scenario we're in now. And that's why you see hashtag Exxon knew, because they did know. They, at the time, were the biggest, most powerful company in the world, and they had the money to hire the best scientists, and they hired excellent scientists, and they put some of them on this task, and they did an excellent job, and here we are. And so, this is one of my favorite new cartoons, and it speaks for itself. This is a tension that I think we find ourselves in with the petroleum industry, which it took me 7 years to write Fireweather, and it took me 7 years to figure out that the petroleum industry is at root a fire industry, and that the petroleum industry is a wholly owned subsidiary of fire, of combustion. Without fire, without the combustibility of petroleum and the energy that we derive from it, there is no industry for them. And right now they are fighting for their lives, and they will burn us down to stay alive. So this is Suncor, one of the big synthetic crude companies up in Alberta. Our purpose is to provide trusted energy that enhances people's lives while caring for each other and the earth. And that's a beautiful mission statement. I would want to work for a company like that. I would want to invest in a company like that. But this is what their new CEO said, who's actually has 30 years in with Exxon. And they brought him in to kind of shake things up a bit. And this is what he said on the record. And that's really where they're at. And so, if you've seen the film The Corporation, the individuals in corporations may be lovely people and wonderful parents, but collectively, the company behaves basically like a wildfire. It wants to expand, it wants to burn, and it doesn't really care who it hurts in the process. This is another wonderful term that we all need to know. We're all victims of it. Alex Steffen again out of Berkeley. Predatory delay, the deliberate slowing of change to prolong a profitable but unsustainable status quo whose costs will be paid by others. In other words, by us. This was, what I learned after 7 years studying this subject. The petroleum industry is a wholly owned subsidiary of fire. And that is an almost kind of metaphysical concept, but it's accurate. And we need to think about energy in a different way. It's been presented to us as this wonderfully lucrative virtue that empowers all of us. That is true. This is also true. So these are lawsuits against the climate industry, against the petroleum industry. And the blue are from other countries, and orange is US, and this is incomplete data. That number is growing. I'm gonna wrap it up here. Reverescence is a really beautiful, potent word that we, along with mitigating the impacts of heat, along with decarbonizing, along with holding petroleum companies acting in bad faith to account. We also need to really focus on the planet's capacity for reverescence, which is regrowing, regreening, regenerating. That is the Earth's default mode after every apocalyptic extinction that we've had. We're in the 6th one. We've been through 5 of these already. They've done colossal damage to the planet, changed it forever, but every time the planet rebounded in very charismatic and beautiful ways. So, and here's an example, a real-time example from our lives. This is Fort McMurray, the neighborhood of Abysand, burnt to the ground, metal warped. It got so hot inside these houses that ceramic toilets, made in a kiln, vaporized. People could not find the toilets or the sinks. That's how hot it was. So 6 weeks later, the city's evacuated for a month, the longest since New Orleans was evacuated due to Hurricane Katrina. And people start trickling back in shock, and they seeing where their houses used to be. And then they're seeing the gardens that they planted. And so you got to, somebody, a human being, planted these tulips, little bulbs. They didn't put them 6 feet down. They put them 6 inches down, the width of your hand. And when you think of the apocalyptic heat hot enough to vaporize a toilet, 500 Celsius, hotter than Venus, kills everything, ran everybody out of town, destroys everything in front of it. And yet 6 inches under the ground are these bulbs planted by human beings. And up they come. Earth cools, and you see the grass. Everybody said the grass was neon green. It was hyper intense. And so we got to think about that too. It's very easy to be overwhelmed and rather doomish about this. And there's legitimate reasons for that. But there's also this inarguable capacity and time-tested, over billions of years, I might add, time-tested capacity of the Earth to regenerate. And we have proved in the past to be good husbands and wives to the Earth, to be good partners with the Earth. We're great at growing things. That's how we got here. And we're great at tuning in to nature's rhythms and needs. That's how we survived. That's one reason we harnessed fire so successfully. So we need to remember that. That's in our genes, it's in our DNA, it's in our self-concept. And the petroleum age has studiously tried to disconnect us from that. And we're suffering with the results right now. So I'm going to leave you with that image. Thank you very much. Actually, I'm probably going to I'm going to stop the share, but thank you very much for your attention. And I look forward to talking about whatever you want to talk about.
Thank you so much, John. Wow. I mean, that is a remarkable photo with the tulips coming up. And yeah, but the devastation is incredible from these fires. We are going to bring on a couple of people from the MEER community who would like to ask some questions. And just a reminder to everybody that you can send questions to Barbara, co-host, in the chat that will be asked later on. So first, we're going to bring on Will Wingert, and Will's entire career centered around disaster preparedness and response. He served as a U.S. Navy corpsman and Air Force Special Forces pararescue man, and decades as a beach lifeguard and fireman, as well as paramedic in California. In that capacity, he responded to vehicle accidents, ocean rescues, cliff rescues, hazardous material calls, and medical aid calls, structure fires, and wildfires. So thank you so much for taking time to come on, Will. Yeah,
Sure.
go
Thanks for
ahead.
having me. So, John has really, put together a brilliant evidence-based piece of work to communicate to the public. And I mean, the first thing I would say is anybody that is in any doubt about climate change, just you could ask any wildland firefighter in the Western United States of what's happened over the last 20 years. And I don't necessarily claim that title. I went to plenty of wildland fires. I was more of a municipal firefighter, but even still, we still saw it, and we deployed. And I can tell you, when I started in the fire line of work, a campaign fire, what we call a campaign fire, where everybody, master mutual aid system gets activated, and people come from all over the state and sometimes the country and even the world now come to these fires. But earlier, maybe 25, 30 years ago, a campaign fire was 60 or 80,000 acres. These things grow by 60 or 80,000 acres in 12 hours now. And some of the things John was referring to, like what we call extreme fire behavior, that was almost a hypothetical term when I started. That's normal. Every wildland fire now is extreme fire behavior. Fire season's year round. We've had fires here in Santa Cruz County in January, and it rains here. I mean, we had a lot of drought, but still, I mean, in January, that it's just unheard of. Equally, John's correct. There's two ways to fight wildland fire: either direct attack or indirect attack. And indirect means all you can do, you can't use really water anymore. All you can do is try to back off and take fuel away and hope that the fire doesn't jump the fire line you've just made. But fire makes its own weather. And on these gigantic fires, it makes radical weather. But even on smaller fires, it still creates its own fire front weather. And so it just starts raining fire out of the sky. It literally starts raining fire. It starts spot fires everywhere. It lands on tops of houses. You run out of water to put it out. You go to refill your tank, and the house is 2/3 of the way burned to the ground because it's so preheated and dried out. So I don't want to take so much of your time here, but John mentioned something really important. The energy release. I didn't know this, but 1/4 acre of coastal sage scrub, chaparral, which, isn't really tall. It's not like tall timber, but 1/4 acre of that, if all of the energy stored in that were released at once, I was told that's the same energy that equal to the atomic weapons that were dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. This is a small amount. It gets released more slowly, but we're talking about running crown fires now in timber, and the rate of energy release is catastrophic. So we're seeing things we've never seen before. I have not personally witnessed this, but I've talked to people who told me they have witnessed what's called area ignition. Area ignition is when everything gets so hot that whole areas just burst into flames. In structure fires, we call that flashover. Okay, we're seeing like wildland flashover. What can happen in an interior structure fires? Everything can get to such a temperature that maybe a window finally breaks and some oxygen rolls in, and everything just bursts into flames. And so that's being witnessed more in the wildland arena. My suspicion is we're going to see more and more of it because it's getting hotter and hotter and drier. So there's something called RAWS data, and I think it stands for, I don't know if they have them in Canada, but I know in the United States, there's somewhere between 2,000 or 2,500 RAWS data stations. And I think it means remote, like automated weather service. It's run by the National Weather Service. And so the fire service knows what's going on out there. They're constantly monitoring the RAWS data, and they have historical RAWS data over time. So, relative humidities have been getting lower. What they call like 100-hour fuel moistures have reached historical lows. In big, giant trees that fell a long time ago, they can measure the moisture that's in that type of thing, and they're at historical lows. So the world is becoming a receptive fuel bed. That's what I would say.
Wow.
We call that like an area that's very, very receptive to fire is like a very receptive fuel bed. It's hot, it's dry, it's preheated, it's ready to go. And it's almost like the whole world now is becoming a receptive fuel bed. We saw fire outside of London a few years ago. I mean, it's never happened. They don't have wildland firefighters outside of London. So we're seeing globally unprecedented wildland fire events. And with respect to the wildland-urban interface, this was, of course, one of our big concerns, because as the population grows, we push further and further to the edge of society, and fighting wildland fire in pure wildland, as opposed to trying to protect neighborhoods at the same time, is its own different beast. And I have a dire prediction for the future, actually, if we don't make some changes. It almost happened in Santa Cruz in 2020. We had the CZU lightning complex that lit up the entire state of California. And we had fire burning in old growth redwood, which, by the way, fire is a normal process that happens in nature, but we've done some things to make that worse by just putting everything out. But that notwithstanding, we actually, for the first time since I've ever lived here, the city of Santa Cruz was potentially the city of Santa Cruz was potentially threatened by a fire up in Bonnie Doon. That was, the wind shifted, but it ended up burning all the way to the ocean. I predict if we don't make some changes, we will start seeing indirect fire attack in neighborhoods, as John showed in Canada. Indirect fire attack is where you take the fuel away before the fire can get there. We may start seeing urban indirect fire attack, where, okay, we have to sacrifice this subdivision and take that fuel away, burn out everything that's left in the hopes we can stop it there. And I hope it doesn't come to that. But I think that's a distinct possibility, if the trend continues as it has.
There's no reason why Canada would be an anomaly here. The houses are built out of the same stuff. It's actually significantly cooler up there. It was extraordinarily hot it was a record-breaking hot day in Fort McMurray, but they're at 58 degrees of latitude. They're, way. So we're basically, Fort McMurray is 2,000 kilometers north of Death Valley, and it had the same relative humidity. And the temperature was about low 90s, so 33 Celsius, blew through the record by about 6 degrees for that day, May 3rd, 2016. And so, if you're bulldozing houses there to save them, and that was a last-ditch spontaneous effort, you're gonna be seeing that elsewhere, for sure. If people can get the equipment and expertise together to do it and do it safely, those bulldozers and backhoes, they have fire curtains and things for California forest use, but you can't drive them like that. That's just to protect people in the case of it getting overrun. But they're not designed for that purpose. Again, when you're thinking of these houses may not be on fire, but when you think of the radiant heat of 500 Celsius blasting in there, heating up the glass, heating up these chambers, you know, that's obviously really difficult for a human being. It's amazing, you know, I guess Canadians are pretty tough, you know, they handled it somehow. And what's amazing is nobody was killed. You know, that's what's really astounding.
That's
given the speed.
because,
Yeah.
you know, that's another thing I think we're seeing more of is people can't get out. And we're seeing, at least in California, you know, in the last decade or so, we're seeing more fatalities in these fires than I think we did in the past. And you're right, this equipment's not made for it. And that what I'm discussing or suggesting is a tactic, if you will, that I don't even think it exists right now. I don't think anybody's even thought of it.
Not on the
You know what
books.
I mean, like we have like strategy, and then strategies are broken down into tactics and you know, tasks to meet those objectives. And I don't even think that exists as a tactical arrow in the quiver right now.
It's like going back to that term discontinuity, events for which past experience can't prepare you. You know, this is a discontinuous strategy. You know, it's not related to anything that we've done in the past. And so we're having to come up, often firefighters, first responders on the fly are having to invent a new way to respond to this thing that is not responding in ways that they were taught it should respond. And so that's, you know, that's going to kill people, and it's certainly going to stress them out. And you know, just the PTSD and I mean, pretty much all the firefighters who stayed on the Fort McMurray fire for weeks, by the way, like it was in and around the city for weeks, which is super unusual, even for California or Australia. And so all that time they are breathing, you know, P2 particulate, but also all the petroleum products that are in every modern house. So all these guys, mostly guys, there's a few women on that crew, they're pretty much reconciled to the fact that they're going to live shorter lives as a result of trying to save that city, which for most of them was their home. And a lot of them saw their own homes burn, which they just let go to try to save something more salvageable. You know, they didn't make the ultimate sacrifice, but they made what I would call the penultimate sacrifice. Giving up your home to save others is a hell of a dedication. And I don't think any first responder has signed on for that. And yet when duty calls, they answered the call. And these new conditions are forcing first responders to answer calls that are not reasonable. You shouldn't be driving heavy equipment for 48 hours. You're going to get killed.
They're doing it routinely. That's happening routinely.
Well, we do want to bring on somebody else, but thank you so much, Will, for coming on and, you know, sharing about your experience and your knowledge. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being here.
We are going to bring on Jonathan Cole next. Jonathan Cole is a reflective energy engineer in California who has been prototyping residential and rooftop reflective foil systems since 2014 to optimize durability and neighborhood acceptance. Thanks for coming on, Jonathan.
Thanks. All right. I want to lighten the mood a little bit. John, in your book, you popularize a term called urban service area. And you point out that it's the area covered by garbage collection and sometimes firefighting services. You point out that it only covers 26 square miles in an area the size of Kentucky, and Kentucky is 40,000 square miles. And that's quite a ratio, you know, 0.1% of the area, whereas in Kentucky, I'm sure it's about 50% of the area.
Sure, yeah.
I think that's a really brilliant way to describe the wilderness and the amount of you know, human controlled area. Did you also determine terminology to describe that once a forest burns, like you pointed out that every 50 years, any average square mile of the forest up there will burn as a natural process. But did you also determine whether the new type of fires will burn an area in a way that makes it so they don't regrow every 50 years? Did you create some sort of a ratio, like the number of years it takes to regreen an area, something like that?
I hear that's a really fascinating question, and it's super nuanced because it really depends so much on geography and plant types and so many other factors. So there would be no one size fits all for that. But what they are seeing, and just to be clear, in the boreal forest, which is the world's largest forest system, it circumnavigates the globe all the way across Canada, Alaska, Russia, Scandinavia, back to Canada again. It naturally burns. It's what you could call a phoenix among ecosystems. It needs to burn in order to regenerate because some of the cones won't release their seeds unless they're heated to temperatures higher than what can be achieved by sunlight alone. So, and those rates of return under natural circumstances, historic circumstances, would be closer to every 100, 150 years. So, but in terms of the rate of fire return, it's much more rapid now. And what's interesting to see also is up in the Brooks Range in Alaska, where there have not been forests since before the last ice age. So 100,000 years, no forest. Forests are now migrating north into these places that have been unforested effectively forever. And they are burning down already. So you can have a forest that might be 10 years old, it's already burning down. And I think that's an indicator of the speed and how skewed the system is. And so what's happening now, we are in a colossal global slow motion by news cycle standards, but extraordinarily rapid by geologic time. And we're in a period of recalibration. So these forest systems that we know and recognize and grew up with very likely won't be the same by the time we are grandparents or passed away. So and what's going to replace them might be savanna, might be a different kind of forest, might be some kind of plant that is much more resilient, like grass, in the face of more rapid fire regimes. But one of the side effects of that, like fire is generally good for a landscape, but repeated fire, and if the other thing is temperature, if the fire is too hot, it will literally cauterize the ground to the point that the tulip bulbs will be killed, and all the whole mycorrhizal networks will be incinerated. So then you have sort of a dead land, and it would be hard to bring that back without some kind of intervention. But another thing that's happening in British Columbia, where I live, an enormous province on the west end of Canada on the Pacific coast here, is what's called hydrophobia. And this is not rabies. This is when conifer forests burn, the resin in the needles melts and coats the ground to the point that when rain falls, the rain doesn't go in. It's almost like it's been sealed. And then you get a torrential rainfall, and it doesn't get gently absorbed into the earth. It washes the earth away, and then you're scoured down to bare rock, and then nothing's growing there. So that is one of the side effects of these really hot, really big fires. But again, in terms of a formula, there is no formula because it's so varied, depending on the incident, depending on the geography, depending on the elevation, depending on what's growing there, depending on so many factors. And anyway, way above my pay grade. But I do know that these are things that foresters and hydrologists are seeing, and that we are in this, we're crossing these, what I would call invisible thresholds, that we don't really know they were there until we cross them. Like I do, going back to what Will was saying, I think there's going to be a wildfire where people's phones and radios start failing because it's too hot. You might be able to still drive the truck around, but you're out in the field and the equipment just overheats, the battery overheats, and now you've lost your comms, and then what? And so we're right on the edge of that. And likewise, there's temperatures at which planes can no longer take off. As the air temperature increases, the air actually expands in ways that make it harder for helicopter rotors to, so to speak, grip the air. So it's, we're kind of on the edge of these very strange and dangerous scenarios. But so to your question, I have a gassy answer, a long-winded answer, but not a specific one, but I hope I've covered some of the parameters.
Yeah, thanks. And while you were researching the book, did you encounter any groups that were using any kind of reflective foil? I know some examples in California where we wrap the favorite redwood trees in these foils,
Right.
and it keeps the fire at bay under certain circumstances.
That's the first time I saw that, was in coverage of the, I think, in the Sequoia forest. And, Canada isn't super progressive that way. Fort McMurray, again, the petroleum hub of Canada, has been rebuilt completely, and they've expanded production. They are in total denial. It's Alberta, for people around the world, Alberta is the Texas of Canada. Many of the same values, many of the, similar ideologies, similar, frankly, hostility toward the federal government, and a deep skepticism of science that doesn't suit their purposes. Because obviously there's a lot of science in running a petroleum industry, but there's climate science, you're literally not allowed to talk about it at the government level. So that's what we're dealing with. So not a lot of reflection in literal or fact or metaphorical going on.
Great, thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. So now we are going to hear some questions from the live audience. And we have a question that's come in from Rebecca. Aside from trying to create the fire breaks that you talked about, burning the structures down ahead of the fires taking over, what new tools are being developed to fight fires if the hoses are not working and, the fire goes up in these storms and so forth? Are there chemicals that, because we kind of live in a chemical heavy place.
Yeah. I think Will probably could answer that question better than me, but there's obviously a lot of fire retardant being used. That stuff isn't totally benign and neutral. It's effective, though embers can fly right over the top of it, the same way they can fly over a fire break. And that is, again, a signal of 21st century fires. Because of these lower humidities and higher temperatures, it means an ember, whether it's a pine cone or a pine needle, can fly through the air and stay ignited for longer and ignite more easily when it lands. So embers can fly 5 miles and ignite a new fire. No fire break is going to be 5 miles. No river, no highway system, no transmission corridor is going to stop that. So then it comes to the communities. And up in Canada here, we have a national organization, a program called Fire Smart. All the firefighting services, municipal and voluntary, are dialed into it, and firefighters will come to your house, come to your neighborhood, come to your cul-de-sac and look things over. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit for reducing fire risk. So a regular citizen can, if they have a property, can reduce the fire risk to that property by double-digit percentages for virtually no money. And a lot of it has to do with what's growing right around your house. A lot of it has to do with, and this is assuming kind of North American house structures, so people live in very different ways around the world. So I just want to acknowledge that this is really focused on North American kind of European style construction, triangular houses with gutters. A clean gutter can keep your house from burning down. A gutter full of last year's leaves, a couple of embers land in there, gets up into the soffits, and you're done. There's no fighting that fire once it gets up into the roof. So this is, again, it's cheap to do. It just requires vigilance. You don't maybe want to have a wooden fence running right up to your house, because a fence under hot, fiery conditions will become a fuse. So will even the mulch in your garden, which is damp and keeps weeds down. But if you have a heat dome, like we're having right now on the west coast of the US, that mulch is going to dry out in a day. Ember lands on that, and now it's going to burn down the whole thing, and it will follow it right to your house. And so that's another factor. So, and then thinking about what's right around the base of your house, what's growing there, stacked there, living there. And so these are, once you start thinking about what would I do if I was a fire trying to burn my house down? What would be my routes of entry? We do this for burglary. We do it for water. You know, we have roofs, we have gutters, we have sump pumps, we have good drainage. We've thought about it. We've got the water dialed. Like most homes don't flood except in these new rain scenarios. You know, Hurricane Rita, 50 inches of rain, it doesn't matter how good your gutter system is. So there are some fires, like some hurricanes and floods, you're not going to stop, but most of them you will be able to if you take conscious precautions. And there are groups like Fire Smart in Canada, I don't know what the equivalent is in other countries, but who are really eager to help you do this. And so that's really hopeful. It's proactive. It's cheap.
Yeah, that's great. That's great for us to be thinking about, and maybe not something people immediately thought of. Here's a question from Bill. Do you feel that the continuing heating of the planet will stress the boreal forests enough to make them go extinct? I know you talked a little bit about how they have to burn, you know, to some degree they have to burn to regenerate.
Yes, I do.
But what about extinction?
It's totally possible. Again, we're crossing these thresholds. Think of the, you know, there's a temperature not much higher than what it is in Southern California right now that will make your phone stop working. And there are temperatures. So here's a perfect example. There's a lovely species of oak tree that grows on the northwest coast of the United States and Canada. And we had a heat dome in British Columbia in 2021. It went up to 49 Celsius in British Columbia, Canada. So out on the coast, it stayed a lot cooler because the Pacific Ocean is right there. Nonetheless, the temperature got close to 37, 38 Celsius. There were Gary oaks growing there, and there's a lot of rock there, so the roots are close to the surface. And I saw this tree with my own eyes killed in 4 days. And this was a huge, healthy Gary oak tree in its prime that had lived there through all the heat waves and everything that nature had thrown at it for the past century. In 4 days, it died. And I called the people who, you know, owned the property that had that tree on it. I called them a year later and I said, have you seen any signs of new growth? And they said, no. It was killed dead. And that temperature, so it was probably maybe 8 degrees hotter than normal. And so we don't even need to, you know, hit 2.5, you know, which we're probably going to almost certainly hit, but it's these heat domes, it's these concentrated moments, periods of heat that might last well under a week, but they will still kill a lot. And then what? You know, what's going to fill that void? And so that's that recalibration that I'm talking about. And it is grievous. And, you know, if you want to see the future or one version of the future, look at coral reefs. You know, we are all tied together. We're all in this together. And the same experience, that thing that's taking firefighters off the line in Northern California right now because it's simply too hot to function physically as a firefighter in gear under stress, is doing the same things to the coral reefs under the water that are trying to function and do their job in gear under stress. We're all, you know, we really are, you know, the beautiful lesson here, it's painful, but the beautiful lesson here is we really are all connected. And there's so much power in conscious unity, in conscious, harmonious, mutually aiding unity.
Yeah, very true. Well, I think we're going to just wrap it up with one final that's from Barbara. How do climate restoration advocates make the connection between the climate crisis and increasing wildfires to the news media and the general public?
Well, I really only know the way that I tried to do it. Well, that's the way I know best. And that, I wrote this book, Fire Weather, that has really penetrated the consciousness in a different way than other climate books have. And one reason I didn't really talk about climate that much, but I talked about the experience of regular human beings, residents of Fort McMurray, firefighters in Fort McMurray and in Redding, California, and just what they saw that day, what they experienced that day, the extraordinary heat followed by this fire that did things no one had seen fire do in that community ever in history. And that's really powerful to get this kind of witnessing. And then, and what struck me is that the types of people, I would say I'm a successful writer, but I'm not a famous writer, not super well known or anything. And this book was about a Canadian fire principally. It's gone all over the place. So I've been called by the World Bank. I've had Bezos's sustainability fund get in touch with me. We had a very conservative prime minister, Stephen Harper, who was, anti-climate science. His head of communications tweeted exuberantly about fire weather, said, everybody, this book's amazing. You got to read it. It's really scary, but you got to read it. So this is a guy who had been, fomenting and wording and phrasing climate denial for his professional career. He's still working. But he was as positive about this book as liberal environmentalists were. And so I think get the book from the library, do whatever you want to do, but I think there might be a template in there that is effective. And it's changed my life. I mean, I've been doing nothing but things like this for the past 14 months. And I've written some other books that have done very well, and nothing like this has ever happened. And all kinds of people, not just environmentally groups, want to talk about this because people feel it. People feel that something is really awry, and it's scary. It's scary how hot it gets. It's scary how smoky it gets. It's scary when you're evacuated from your home. It's scary when your mother or father who lives by themselves 1,000 miles from you is evacuated from their home. And it's also scary to hear politicians and petroleum CEOs talk in a way that is so callous and so heartless. And there's a real dissonance there. So those of us who are kind of dialed into this visceral reality that we're experiencing and that we're talking about today, need to find common cause and need to find create our own coral reef of voice and purpose. And because there's so much variety in those systems, that's the power in it, is the variety. And that's the power in us too, is our variety. But we're all, trying to build this same beautiful structure. And, that's why I'm here today, speaking with you. So.
Yeah, well, we want to thank you so much for coming, John, and congratulations on your book. And everybody, if you have not checked it out, please do check out Fire Weather. So thanks for coming and talking with us today, John.
Thanks, everybody. Really glad to be with you. And I'm easily found on Twitter or by email through Kaiza. If you want to be in touch, I'm really glad to be in touch with folks, just so you know. I would like to be in touch with Will, certainly. I had some more questions for him. And Jonathan also, really, appreciate your work. It's, we got to do it. And I should say to Jonathan, my neighbor painted his roof white. And we're in Canada, we are, and we're in a really cool, we're right near the water. We have the mitigating cooling influence of the Pacific, and people are starting to buy air conditioners now in a place that's never seen an air conditioner in its life. And so this guy, using that technology, the low tech, anybody can do it, painted his roof white, and because he sleeps up there. So in the attic. So it's coming, and it's effective, and we need all hands on deck.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, John. Take good care.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, everybody.
At MEER, we are working to help educate the public while also developing a solution to the warming on the planet. We invite you to keep learning about Earth's energy imbalance and climate science on our website. We're a mostly volunteer staff, so please consider making a monthly donation of any amount if you've enjoyed being here or watching our MEER Talks on the YouTube channel. Please check us out on social media, and if you've found being here beneficial, then tell somebody about MEER Talk. We hope to see you all again next month on Sunday, August 4th. So until then, everybody, take care. Thanks for coming.